Have you ever been on the water and struggled with casting in the wind? Maybe things were going great and then the wind started kicking up, fish were feeding, but you couldn't make that cast, that perfect cast to hook up with those big fish. And what if I told you there were some easy drills you could do in your yard just 30 minutes a week to prepare you to have more success on the water? My guest today is a certified casting instructor and coaches people both online and in person, and is going to help us level up our accuracy and distance fly casting this year. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. How's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers, casting anglers than just about anyone out there in the world. Kalyn Hoggard is here, a certified casting instructor and record-chasing brown trout master. He's going to give us some tips and his favorite casting drills to have better success on the water this year. You will find out how to determine your max carry when casting, how to determine the max line that you can carry, and a drill around that exercise. We're going to find out when to haul for the most speed out there, when to do the double haul, when to actually do it. You're going to learn about the arc and how to know when to increase your arc or decrease your arc. And we're also going to get Bruce Richards' 6-step analysis system. The Bruce Richards, the system. This is going to be awesome. Plus, did I mention that Kaylyn is a brown trout hunter and has landed fish over 40 inches? All right, let's see how to level up our casting game and our big hunting skills. Here he is, Kalyn Hoggard on Insta at The Fly Road on Instagram. How you doing, Kaylyn?
Another beautiful day here in Wisconsin. Doing great.
Nice. I love that we're talking Wisconsin here a little bit, because I'm heading out. We have a couple of schools actually going on as we speak. Well, not as we speak this year. So we've got, I'm going to be in there in September, actually 2 trips. We got mid-September for muskie, and then we're going to be at the Driftless at the end of September for some trout, technical trout. So, and then you have this thing going. Maybe talk about that. Do you know both of those other fisheries I mentioned there? And then how is that different than what you do out there?
Oh, yeah. So, we're famous for muskie, right? World famous. I actually, I caught a 47-incher last week.
Oh, wow.
On fly. I was chasing around, had like 10 chases and on foot, right? So not even that hard, right? Not getting in a boat. I'm just kidding. It's really hard. But I got in a good spot and found some pretty good fish last week. Muskie, it's a fun game to play. I haven't quite nerded out all the way, but it's great. It's fun. Big toothy critters, and the bycatch is pike, right? And they're fun too.
Right.
So it's a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Driftless, I've fished in a lot of places for trout. I've spent a lot of time out west. I used to guide in the Smokies, tournament fish in the Smokies and all that stuff too. And so I've seen a bunch of different bodies of water. Grew up in Arkansas, right? So White River.
Right.
And there's something about the Driftless. It is a special place. Densities of trout per mile is ridiculous. We get some really cool hatches. The caddis hatch here is nuts,
Oh, nice.
And so it's really different. It's not as much like anything else, right? I mean, like, you do freestone stuff in those small streams, and that's really cool. But these meandering spring creeks out here in these pastures and stuff, the Driftless is a really cool place.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. So I always feel like, I kind of, the way we set up our trips is I have, guests on the podcast. Then when I really resonate with them, I kind of reach out eventually if we can to some of these trips. And that's why how we've set these schools up. One of them, in Arkansas, one that we haven't set up yet, but I'm thinking about it, is Chad Johnson down there. Are you familiar with his work down there?
I am. He is, he's a great guide, great caster, great fly tire. Yeah. I mean, if you were going to go with a guy, for sure. He knows his stuff.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, today, I think your stuff as well on this area, because we're going to talk. You can look at your Instagram. We'll send everybody out to The Fly Road. That's _fly_road on Instagram. And they can check out some of these photos. You just basically have a massive group of huge brown trout, anadromous fish. Fish that are migratory.
Right.
And so we're going to talk about that today, but also fly casting. I think you were on a recent webinar we did, a live webinar.
Sure.
And it was really awesome. I watched the whole thing. Greg, my partner at the School of Fishing, kind of hosted it, but it was really awesome because you broke down some tips on fly casting. And I think today we're going to kind of follow up on that a little bit and maybe help people get more accurate, get more casting and all that stuff, right? So we're going to get but before we get there, we always like to take it back real quick on fly fishing. First, take us to how you got started in fly fishing and kind of what's your first memory.
Yeah, I took fly fishing seriously when, I got out of college, and I had about a year waiting on my wife. And so I just kind of went to the river and stayed there for 6 months on Little Red, and ended up being in a fly shop and guiding and casting and doing all that stuff. But my first memory, my grandfather was really big into panfish. He loved to eat them. And so we would golf together all the time at this country club where I grew up. And he would always take a fly rod, and he'd play next to the water, and then he'd try to catch some bluegill. And then we'd go the next hole, and he'd play next to the water, and he'd try to catch some bluegill.
Oh, wow.
And so eventually we just stopped taking clubs, right? We'd get in a golf cart, we'd ride around at the country club and stop at all the different waters and, fly fish for bluegill. And I think that, partially, right, the memory and the nostalgia of it really, really set it home. But, it was a good time, and, fished with him for a long time, fly rod. And that really kind of started everything for me in some ways. But like I said, I got really serious about it when I got out of college at Central Arkansas. Went to Little Red and started working in a fly shop and doing that thing.
Okay. Yeah. I love that with your grandfather. That's pretty amazing that you were golfing, and I've done a little bit of golfing, but golfing and fishing. And did your grandfather, did he do any other types of fishing, or was that his focus on these panfish?
He did it other ways, but once he figured out kind of like that dry dropper situation with bluegill and got pretty good at it, I mean, catching them two at a time was his way, right? Fill up a bucket and let's go have a fish fry, right? And so we did that a lot, and even whenever he was quite a bit older, I had a man-made lake at my house, and we would catch bluegill and clean them and take them over to him and fry them up and have little fish fries and stuff with him. And those are great memories, right? Bluegill definitely are, an awesome fish to target with a fly rod, right? They let you make mistakes. They're willing to eat, and they're a good fight and everything. And yeah, it was a good time.
Wow. That's really awesome. Yeah. I think that, I love the stories there of, just kind of the family stuff, because a lot of people, that's how they, planted the seed. And then later, like you said, after college or there, you kind of got into it hardcore. What did that look like? What was the difference between, kind of where you were before college and after? It sounds like you kind of went all into it.
Yeah. So I've fished a lot. We used to go to Florida every year, used to go offshore, do all that stuff. And, fishing's always kind of been like a main theme in what I've had going on forever. And so I fly fished a little bit in college, quite a bit, I guess, for your average person. And then when I got out, I kind of had the itch, and went and started catching, stocky rainbows and Little Red. And it was like, well, what's this brown thing like? And then started finding some really big browns and getting into that thing, those big tuggers, and big predator flies, doing the streamer thing and catching fish that were bigger than I should have been with, basically how novice I was. And yeah, that first 30 incher, right? I mean, to be honest with you, I caught my first 30-inch brown, and it was pretty much over from there.
Oh, wow.
I got rid of all my conventional gear. I think all I've got left is a beach tarpon rod, and it's just fly rods, right? Like, that's just how I want to do it. And it's the challenge of the thing,
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I think we'll hold the brown talk for a little bit later, because I think that is huge. 30-inch brown just seems kind of, extraordinary for sure. But let's talk fly casting, because that was pretty awesome. Your experience, you're going through the FFI certification. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit, where you're at there, but maybe, and then after that, talk about a few tips to help somebody maybe get more accurate, longer cast, that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I've kind of been on this journey with FFI to become a casting instructor, and they've got exams and, stuff that you have to pass, a written and a performance exam. And it's a hard test. You can get your hands on the test, right? If you're a caster and you think you're pretty good, and go through some of those tasks for the performance, it'll surprise you. I thought I was a pretty good caster, and then it was like, oh, there's different levels to this, right? And I worked on it for a couple of years. I got lucky. A colleague of mine in Iowa, Marty McVeigh, introduced me to Bruce Richards, and just pretty much it was wheels on the ground, here we go. And working with Bruce as a mentor, it's incredible. I can't say enough about him. He knows everything about it, and just through emails and going out there and casting with him, it just really honed my cast, got me to learn more about the mechanics of a fly rod, and how it works. And the more you know about it, like the easier things start to become, right? You start fixing the problems on your own, and then filming myself, to get better and better. You want to look at those loops and starting to film myself to practice for that exam. You're your best teacher in a lot of ways. You see the mistakes you make. If you know what the mistakes are, first you got to learn what they are, right? But once you know what they are and you know what kind of loops you want, filming yourself, I can't say enough. But yeah, so I passed the CI exam last August, and I'm hoping to take the MCI next year. That's kind of the plan. So yeah, I'm still learning the hard stuff. I think I'm pretty close. We'll see. But yeah, so taking the MCI, it's a big deal.
And MCI stands for, is that Master Certified Instructor?
Yeah, so it's the Master Casting Instructor, and that certification is through Flatfish International.
Yeah, FFI. That's sweet. So you've got that coming, and we've heard some stories definitely from some great fly casters on here about those challenges, like you said, where you think you're better than you are, then you get in there and you learn like, wow, I'm not quite that good, or you're good, but you're not at the same level. Maybe talk about that. What are if somebody's listening now, a lot of people have experience, they've been fly fishing for a little while, but they struggle like myself, maybe it's getting more distance, maybe it's accuracy, right? Trying to get that fly in the pie plate. Can you talked some tips on that webinar we did.
Sure.
Give us that. Let's run it down that. What are some things people can be doing right now? And maybe filming themselves is one of those. I'm not sure. What are a few of those tips?
Yeah, absolutely. Filming yourself is important because you're not always able to see that back loop. And kind of depending on your stance, everybody has a little bit of a different style. Certain styles just don't allow you to really look at that back loop. So you really do need to film yourself. What that back loop is doing is important because you want it to be perfectly straight before you go on that forward cast, right? So that is a really important thing. Generally speaking, let's roll it back a little bit. Generally speaking, it's loop control. So the loop, that's the shape the fly line takes in the air that looks real pretty that everybody likes to see, right? Having control over that loop is probably the most important thing, right? You want it to be straight. And when I mean straight, that's from every direction. So you want it to go straight away from the target and straight to the target. So you don't want to curve around. You don't want it to have a big curve in the top of the loop. You want it to be a straight line. And so working on loop control, I did the grass drill, which essentially, you've got a cone, and then 6 feet, you've got a cone, and 6 feet, you've got a cone. Okay. And what the grass drill does is you start at one cone and you accelerate to the other cone, like you're going to do a back cast or a forward cast. And when you do that, since it's on the ground, you can look at that loop. You can see the loop very easily. And it's something I start with beginners too. But seeing that loop and making it get smaller and smaller, making it be efficient, and really working on that grass drill, and it's something you can look up pretty easily. Working on that grass drill on the tape, that's a really good start for loop control. And then you just kind of take it up in the air, right? Go from that horizontal to that more vertical loop. And that's kind of what I'm talking about with loop control as an example of how complicated things can get. I'm not going to jump into the weeds too far, but when I say loop control, for me, if I'm hauling at 60 feet, I can have, a 2 foot loop, no problem, right? And that's a pretty small loop for 60 feet, right? But when I talk about control, it's not just that I can do that, but I can do it and it looks like I am casting way too slow, right? I don't know if you really noticed that much during the webinar, but I really don't put a whole lot of effort into some of those casts when I'm teaching, especially. But it looks like there's no way that fly line will straighten out, right? At 60 feet. It's because it's so efficient. I have so much control over that loop. I can slow it way down and it still be a real tight loop. And then the vice versa, right? So if I want to go really fast at 60 feet, if you have control over your rod and your arc size, you can still have that small loop going way faster than you ever want to go. And the question's why it's important, right? Well, headwind, for example, you got to get that fly line moving fast. So if you can control your loop, keep it small and go really fast, you're going to pierce the wind better. You got a better opportunity to get it out there. You didn't waste, however much money you spent on your guide trip out to the flats, right? Because you got there and it was a 20-mile-an-hour wind in your face and you're like, oh no, I can't do this. Well, if you'd have practiced getting that fly, line speed up and casting faster and keeping good control over that loop, it'll shoot through there.
Gotcha. I love that. That's a great start. But it makes sense the way you explain it. And this is what you did in that webinar. You really clarified it. And we'll put a link out that in the show notes so people can take a look at that. But yeah, so the loop control, what you're saying is, if you have a 2 foot loop at 60 feet, and you're just like you did. I noticed it. Yeah, it seemed like you're effortlessly the way you were casting those lines, even at whatever it was, 80 feet, I think. But what you're saying is if you have a tight loop, you can get into the wind maybe potentially, right? If you have a headwind or something. Now, how do you get that tight loop? Let's say your loop's 3 feet or 4 feet. How do you get a tighter loop?
Right. So tighter loops are really going to be dependent on those 5 essentials from Gamel's 5 essentials. So Jay and Bill Gamel, which are, heroes, foundational for fly casting. They came out with a pamphlet for FFI a long time ago, and it basically broke down these essentials, right? And so one is you want to have a straight line rod tip path. So the tip of the rod, you want it to go straight from start to stop, right? You got to minimize the slack. So if you have any slack in the system, that's going to make, it's going to make it less efficient, and you're going to end up with a wider loop essentially because of that. You got to have the right amount of force, right? So you've got a certain amount of line. It takes a certain amount of force to move that weight to where it needs to go, and, the more line you have, the more force you have to apply. The less line, the less force you have to apply, that sort of thing. And then casting arc. So that rod's bending and you want that rod tip to go straight. Well, you want it to be straight with the rod bending. So you're bending the rod just enough for whenever you stop, the rod is at the straight position again. It's stopped bending. So that's really important. And then proper timing, right? So another thing that puts slack in it, if you pause for too long between your casts, the line's either going to, the line's going to go down, it's going to sag, you're going to get slack, and you're going to throw these wider loops. And then if it's too short, it's the opposite, right? Everybody knows about, whipping it or popping the fly off. They call it the $2 cast, right? Where you start going forward too fast, it snaps, you break the sound barrier, and that fly goes flying off into the weeds, right? So those are the 5 essentials from Gamel, and it's worth everyone's time to read that stuff. The original pamphlet's great. I know that Bruce Richards put out an article in the Loop, and I'm pretty sure everybody can have access to that, where he revisited the essentials recently. And so, he had talked to Bill about it, and he had wrote a thing, I think it was this year, in the Loop, and it really breaks it down. It's something really worth looking at.
And what is the Loop? Describe that. What is the Loop? Is that a publication?
Yep. So that's the Loop magazine. It's a publication through FFI. And so you've got, basically it's all master casting instructors and casting instructors that break down a particular item, right? And so for this, this is kind of a big thing, right? Doing the essentials, but they talk about different things like with wind, they talk about, curve casts, all that stuff in there. It's coming from the best of the best, right? So pretty much all that stuff is gold, read through it. And there's certain people that, I have bias, right? Like I'm going to read Bruce's stuff, as I can, right? But yeah, so the Loop, it's a great place to get information. They talk about fishing and all that stuff too, not just casting for casting's sake, but it's a great resource. Another one is Sexy Loops. It's Paul Arden's website. He's probably maybe the best caster in the world right now. There's a discussion forum on there where just some of the greatest guys, world competitive fly casters are on there talking about, as detailed in the physics as you want to get, but also as broad as, what fly line for what presentation. Those are great resources. I can't say enough.
Imagine a place where a river meets your doorstep without breaking the bank. Introducing Jackson Hole Fly Company, redefining the online fly shop experience. JH Fly Co. designs and manufactures all of their own products so they can deliver high-quality fly rods, reels, flies, and gear directly to your door at incredible prices. Whether you're a novice angler or professional guide, we think you're going to love Jackson Hole Fly Company. You can visit them right now at jacksonholeflycompany.com. Want to experience a magic trick? On a certain river at a certain time of day, time slows down. Where is this place? Located in the heart of Montana is a place where people go to slow things down, to float down a historic river, and to watch the birds dance across the sky. Watch animals explore the open land, and of course, to fish. If you're looking to slow things down, Helena, Montana is waiting for you. Visit Helena, Montana right now. You can head over to helenamt.com to get a change of pace this year. You mentioned, the straight line path, minimizing slack, the right force, casting arc timing. So on the right force,
right?
Describe that a little bit. What is the right force? How do you know when to put the right force, and what is that?
So, that can actually come off a little bit misleading, right? So one of the main things with that proper application of force, right, is the actual essential. It's proper application. And so in many ways, what we're talking about is how you apply the force throughout your casting stroke. So you've made your back cast and you're going to make your forward cast. Here it comes, right? Ideally, you want to accelerate from start to finish. So you're going faster, 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 and you get to that stop and you stop hard. What you have a tendency of seeing, what I see with guys that have been spin fishing, their whole life, is that they're used to launching the lure, right? And in fly fishing, we're actually using the line to bend the rod, right? So we're launching the line out there. And what they'll typically do is they'll start off pretty slow and smooth, and then they just hit it really hard at the end. Well, it's kind of an abrupt application of force, right? So it's too slow at the beginning and then it's too fast at the end. So that proper application of force is really just accelerating through to a stop. And, if you're really fast at the beginning and really slow at the end, it's not going to work out well. If you're, really fast in the middle, and a lot of these things are going to end up in a tail, right? You're going to throw a tailing loop. It's going to put a knot in your leader. You're going to break off the biggest fish of your life. That's how I like to try to convince people.
All right.
We don't want the tails, right? You put that knot in there and you're pushing the boundaries with your tippet for bonefish, for example, and you threw a tailing a tailing loop into the wind and you hooked up on a 10-pounder and it just immediately broke you off. Right. So tailing loops are one of those things, you're really trying to avoid, and that proper application of force is the right way to avoid it.
Okay. So that's the right force. And we've heard that before. I think of a recent episode, I think Tim Ray Jeff was on, he was talking about that same thing. And there's also the paintbrush analogy, right? The slow, you start from slow, stop and on your back cast, and then the same thing on your forward cast. Is that correct? With the same force when you're doing that cast?
Absolutely. I actually look at it, I like the paintbrush analogy. I've got another one. Maybe this will resonate with people. So I used to do this with kids all the time. And I've actually got a little wiffle ball dowel rod set up that I use with kids now and adults. But, what I like to think about, is a dowel rod, right? So if you got a dowel rod, like a 1/2-inch dowel rod, and it's 3 feet long, okay? And I were to come up to you and I put an orange on the top of it and just stuck that orange into the dowel rod. And I said, okay, I want you to launch this orange as far as you can, right? Well, it helps with a couple of different things. If you go too far forward and too far down in your forward cast, it's just going to hit the ground in front of you, right? If you don't put the right amount of force into it, the orange is not going to come off the dowel rod at all, right? If you put too much into it, it may come off before you get to the right launch angle. It may go straight up in the air, right? And so thinking about that and imagining how you'd launch that orange, it's similar to that paintbrush analogy, right? But for me, it works really well with everybody, just kind of thinking about, okay, if I was going to throw this orange over, as far as I could throw it, stopping hard, applying the force properly, that's what you would end up doing.
Gotcha. Well, this is great. I think this is a good start on where we're going here with some of these, some of the tips. What about drills? Let's talk about that. You mentioned the one with the, you did this in the webinar as well, the side, you start where the cast is out in front of you and you kind of stop with the cones. What are some drills that can help people, with their accuracy or just their casting in general?
Yeah, sure. So that grass drill, and a lot of it's going to be hard without like seeing me and showing you, but,
well, let's stop there, Kaylyn, just for one sec. Let's give a shout out to kind of your online. We didn't talk a lot about this, but maybe talk about that. You guys do some online coaching drill. Maybe describe that because people can take this a little further, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's back to that video on yourself thing too. So Marty and I, here in the Midwest, there's, few and far between when it comes to instructors, and there's plenty of fishers, right? There's plenty of fly fishers around, and he and I have Bruce Richards as a mentor. It's how we know each other. And we worked together on the test. We worked together on a lot of stuff. So we decided that we should put together basically an online virtual casting instruction situation, right? And we've worked it out. We've done some really cool videos and really worked hard on this. But essentially what we're able to do is we can, you can use this app called OnForm. And with that app, we can analyze your cast. We can look at your, casting arc. We can look at your loops. We can look at everything in like 8 speed, like real slow motion, all that stuff. And so what we do is essentially we'll break down a drill. We'll have a video that we send to you. We get you to try to do that drill as best you can. And then we can analyze that cast. We can look at it with you. We can do voiceovers on it, draw on it. And then we can talk via Zoom, or we can talk on the phone or whatever, and really get you getting those drills better and better. And then as it progresses, we can go as far in advance as you want to. For the most part, probably not going to be training any, world casting guys. But yeah, as far as like being a good advanced caster, yeah, we've been doing that and it's been working pretty well. We've had a lot of people that are casting much better now than they were when they started.
Yeah, that's great. So basically somebody can reach out to you and we'll have a link to your email in the show notes or on Instagram, like we mentioned, but they can reach out and say, hey, I'm struggling, or I'm getting ready for a bonefish trip or something like that. And they want to help you, right? The wind is going to be something. What is the OnForm app? Is that something that's made for like casting, or what is that app?
Yeah. So OnForm, it was originally for golf instructors. So doing swing analysis for golf instructors, and they found out that, hey, there was this group that really wanted to use it. And so now they're working with the fly fishing industry. I know they kind of work directly with FFI as well. And so it's just a really easy way to hold big video files, be able to do voiceovers. It's got a lot of tools where we can write on videos and draw on it like I was talking about. But yeah, with OnForm, it's free for the user if you've got like an instructor, right?
Oh,
so
wow.
I can send you the link. You can get OnForm for free. I pay a monthly, subscription or whatever, but it's free for the user to download and be able to use. And so it's actually a really valuable app. Even if you were going to just film your casting and you didn't have an instructor, getting that app and being able to see your casting in that thing in slow motion, it's wonderful.
Wow, this is great. Okay, so we got an awesome app, and that's something they can connect with you on as well.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a few drills. So I can't remember what you did on that evening session we did, but you had the one with the cones in front of you. What are some? Walk us through a few more drills people could do at home, on the grass or whatever, or on the water.
Sure. So especially if you're going to work on distance, and I think everybody does to a certain degree. I have people here in the driftless with a small water that are convinced that they don't want any more distance, right? But they don't realize they do. That headwind, you want to be able to cast further than you really can to still be able to fish on those days when it's a 25-mile-an-hour wind. That does not turn me around. I'm going to still go and probably fish dries and probably catch them really well, especially during hopper season, right? So, kind of the breakdown is you want to do drills that help with your shooting, right? So basically shooting line is when you finish that forward cast, you come to that hard stop. You want to be able to let line shoot through your fingers and get more distance, right? So shooting drills just in general, I like the pick up and lay down. So a pick up and lay down cast, basically have a line straight out in front of you, your rod tip down. You pick it up, you make a back cast, and you make a forward cast, and you lay the line down. And doing that and seeing your loops and gaining control and changing distances is really good for loop control. And then if you shoot with it, so that's one of the drills we did in the webinar, if you shoot with that drill, you can learn like how much distance can you get out of a shoot at this, if starting from this distance, what can you shoot to? And practicing that and getting better at shooting, getting more efficient. So a pick up and lay down drill, shooting line is a really good way to get started. And then all these kind of work together. So false casting, right? So what we do false casting for typically in fishing is to dry out that dry fly, get the water off of it so it sits up nice and pretty on the surface for us. What you do for it in the grass while you're practicing is that loop control thing again, right? You want to make that back cast, forward cast, back cast, forward cast, lay it down, really work on your timing, work on your pause, your application of force, your arc size, all that stuff. And it's really valuable. I false cast every day and I go further and further distances, and there's a reason why that's coming up. But as you get further and further out there, you start realizing how much line can you carry above your head, right? And so you get to a spot where you can't carry anymore. And what I mean by carrying line essentially is how much line is out past the rod tip while you false cast and you still have loop control. So, for me, it can be pretty far. I've done recently, I was doing without a haul, I was carrying 75 feet of fly line in the air. And so, without a haul, it's a long way, but that's where I'm at as far as controlling my loops. I'm still throwing a 2-foot loop at 75 feet without hauling. 2.5, 3 foot, depends on who you. Marty would probably say they were 4-foot loops, but I think they were probably around 2.5 foot. So that's that control, and it took a while for me to get there, a lot of practice. But if you can carry that much line, then when you shoot it, you're going to get it that much further, right? And so that's one of those things, working on false casting with that max carry, finding out how much line you can carry. It's really important. Shooting at the end to see what you can get it to. So say your max carry, you can carry 40 feet in the air. Right. Well, when you shoot the line, we think that you can get somewhere between 50 and 25% of that extra. right? So if you're carrying 50 feet, you have a really efficient shoot, you're going to get, another 25. You might shoot it out to 75, which that would be great. And so for the shooting thing, you'd start there. You break down those drills, you work on shooting, and then hauling. Hauling's one of those things like patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. I love people starting in the grass. It really makes sense. You do a grass drill where you haul from one cone to the next cone, let it sit down. Haul from one cone to the next cone, let it sit down. And basically, starting out, you want to haul throughout the entire cast. So as soon as you start it moving, hauling the whole way. When you stop the rod, you stop the haul. You look at what the loop does, and you work on that. Work on your timing, work on your rhythm, and then you pick it up from the grass and get higher and higher in the air. And then eventually you'll get to the point where you've got it straight vertical in the air and you're hauling pretty well. That's a really good way to start out hauling. And then the same thing as we did with the shooting line. So then you do your false carry, you do a pickup and lay down, you do this max carry with your hauls, and all that stuff is coming together to make loop control happen and then make more distance happen, make a more efficient loop happen. And if you have an efficient loop with a straight top leg, you're going through straight line, you're going to be more accurate. It's just going to force you to be, right? You have to go straight. You'll notice that you're not going to get that distance if you're not straight. It just blows up on you, right? And it makes it even worse if you're going really fast. Okay. So if you're not hauling and you have a really bad tracking error, and what a tracking error is, say you go, you're right-handed and you take the rod tip way out to the right side and behind you. And then when you come forward, you take it to the left side and in front of you, right? So that'd be a tracking error. You're off angle. So if you do that and not haul and it's real slow cast, it's not too crazy, but you can tell it curves at the end. You're missing your target to the left all the time if you're right-handed. But if you add a haul and a shoot to that, you're just adding energy to this big curve that you're throwing, and it just blows it up. It just makes it so much worse. I try to tell people, don't do the hauling stuff, don't do the shooting stuff until you get that loop control, because a haul is not going to make a better cast. It's going to make it blow up faster, basically, right? It just makes it even bigger than it would have been.
Right.
And so that's kind of that breakdown. I like those drills, just getting started, false casting, pick up and lay down, max carry. That stuff is going to make you better in every way. With accuracy in particular, it depends on how accurate you want to be and how you want to present the fly. I do like accuracy drills where you actually got a cone or you've got something out there, you've got them at different distances, and you start with your fly in your hand. So that's how fishing is, right? You walk up, you've got your fly in your hand and you're like, oh, there's a rosin fish, or oh, there's a tailing red, or whatever it is. And you cast and you let line slip through until you get to what you think's the right distance. You hover that fly above where you want it to land and you shoot it in there. Practicing that in the grass will make you so much better when you go on that trip, or with me, I see it a lot too, where we know that there's a giant brown in a certain slot and you want to make sure you get it far enough above him that the fly gets down when it gets to him. You swing it right in front of him, do the right strip, and catch, the fish of a lifetime, right? So that accuracy stuff, I can't overstress the importance of it. I mean, you really have to work on that stuff and get out in the grass and cast. A lot of people try to practice on the water and while they're fishing, and it's just not the way to do it. Hammer it into your head in the grass. That's the number one thing, is practice, really. Hammer it in your head while you're casting in the grass, and then apply it to your fishing situations.
Yeah, this is great. Okay. So all of this, the casting in the grass, I want to talk about some higher level, exercises, or if somebody wants to take the next level. But as far as practicing, what's your recommendation? If somebody's listening now, they can cast, but they want to do some of these drills. Is 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a week? What's a good timing people can think about?
Yeah. So, I don't like to do crazy long amounts of time. For me, it's different, right? Because I'm wanting to compete and I'm working on the FDI. So I spend a lot of time in the grass.
Right. Like, how much time do you spend in the grass per day, per week?
So typically probably at least 4 days a week, and we're talking probably 2 hours at a time, but that's crazy. That's a crazy amount.
That's a lot.
Yeah. You can get tennis elbow. I've learned it the hard way. Yeah. So what I would rather people do, especially like right before season or right before the weekend, get out in the afternoon after work or time before it gets dark, get in a place where you've got cover from wind, so it's not blowing your line around everywhere. And if you go out there and spend 20, 30 minutes at most and just really work on accuracy a little bit, really work on distance a little bit, over time, it's going to explode for you. I mean, it'll be so much better. You don't have to do it every day. If you do it once a week like that during the season and you're fishing too, it will be just leaps and bounds. It'll blow your mind how much it'll help.
Perfect. And are these exercises you mentioned, where can we see, things that maybe we don't cover today? You talked about a couple of resources if people want to find some more drills.
Sure.
Where should they go?
Well, one great thing, shameless plug, is with FFI. If you become a member with Fly Fishers International, they have a litany of videos and, write-ups and, different diagrams you can look at. They've got all the drills on there, especially the ones that I've talked about. They're going to have them on the FFI website. If they don't have a video of somebody casting it, they probably will soon. Really detailed descriptions on how to do all that stuff, what lengths of line you want to use, what angles, degrees. FFI is great for that. You can find some of it on YouTube for sure. There's guys out there. Sometimes you get bad information that way. That's why I really went the FFI route, right? We want to get it from, the best information that we can. That's why I kind of plugged him for that. They do a great job really describing all that stuff in detail.
Gotcha. No, this is great. So yeah, anything else you want to shed? I know we're hitting some high level stuff here, but anything else you want to shed light on as far as the casting to help that person with their distance, accuracy, and just kind of all around casts?
Well, so there is one thing I wanted to bring up. So we talk about max carry, and the longer you can carry, the longer you can cast, right? If you add the haul and the shoot to it and all that stuff. There is another factor. Obviously there's tons of variables like the rod, stiffness of the rod, all that stuff. There's one in particular that I think is useful, and it's knowing about your fly line. And so I'll give you an example. Whenever I do, streamer fishing, for example, I use a really short taper, really short head. So I think specifically a lot of the times I'm throwing the Outbound Short by Rio. And so it's got a really short head. It's really heavy in the front. And it's great if you want to pick it up, make one back cast and a big shoot and haul it forward and deliver. Big shoot. It'll get it out there pretty far really quickly. It's great. So you're not false casting, overfishing, all that stuff. So I may cast it, pick it up. I'm only carrying 50 feet and I may get that sucker out there to 80, right? It may just fly off with one false cast and a haul and a shoot. Whereas if you have like a long taper or a long head, right? Those are going to be a lot more delicate of a presentation, and you can really cast them a lot further. And in general, they're a lot more accurate, but you lose all of that, make a short cast and get it there stuff. So there's a lot of details around this, right? You can go down this rabbit hole as far as you want to, but just kind of as an example, if I'm out in the driftless and I'm casting far at spooky risers, I'm going to use like a long head with a long taper because I can make a really accurate cast at a really far distance if I need to. And just the presentation's just going to lightly, go to the water like I want. Where if I had a short head, it's going to smash that water, right? It's going to come in, kick that thing over because it's made to kick bigger flies over. So, that's another thing too. You get into these levels of understanding. That's one of those things. Like if you're trying to really work on your distance cast with a short head fly line, it's probably not the way to go. Your expectations should be much lower. It's not going to go as far as you can cast like a long head.
No. I remember back in the day when double tapers, there's a number of reasons that they used to be popular, but it seems like they're not as popular. Are double tapers still worthwhile?
Well, in some ways, if you want to throw really, really far, they are. It's just not a thing anymore. And really the MED, the Mastery Expert distance from Scientific Angler, really kind of squashed the need for a double taper, in my opinion. Of course, that's an opinion. That's a really long head. So that's what I was casting in the webinar. That's a 70-foot head. And we can get into complicated stuff about wanting to have a head in the top of the loop and all that. But they make a Mastery Trout edition that's the same proportions, basically. So that Mastery Trout casts very similar to the MED. So if you wanted a long head and you wanted it to be a really nice presentation, something like that would be really good.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, we won't go too deep today because I don't want to miss out on some of the fishing tips and tricks as well, because
sure.
Who doesn't want to catch a 30-inch brown? So
yeah.
Maybe let's change it real quick for a little bit here and talk about that. We've got all the casting. We know where we can follow up with you on the casting to, kind of level up that. But what is it? Maybe take us to your home water, maybe talk about that a little bit. And how do you go about catching 30-inch brown trout?
Yeah. So, in general, they're usually more rare than my, example here. Right. So on the white, now also I grew up in Arkansas. I've got a place over off the Bull Shoals Lake, which is a reservoir for the White River. And so Big Brown's is kind of a thing for me. It always has been. And that's one of those few places in the world, right? The White River, one of the few places in the world to look for a big fish. And, throwing big predator flies at them is the way to do it. You basically weed out the smaller fish, the bigger you go. So the smaller fish aren't taking your fly in that hole that has that giant in there, because the fly is as big as that small fish, right? And so that's a really good way to think about it too. That bigger fly stuff, it really gets them going. And
how big do you go with the fly? Like what? Because we've heard, like, we're going muskie, and I remember Dan,
huge,
at Muskie Fool was like, oh, we can use up to 20-inch flies. I was like, what? Yeah. 20-inch flies? That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's the way with muskie too. It seems like, if you've got a 10-inch fly and you don't see a fish all day, and you go through that same run with a 16, 17-inch fly and you see them all, right?
God.
It's crazy. I love it though. It's a lot of fun. With this stuff, I'm typically throwing like a 6-inch bait fish pattern. I'm usually trying to mimic, over here, I'm trying to mimic alewife. I'm trying to mimic, big gobies, or, in most rivers, it'll be like big sculpin. And so, up to 6 inches is usually the kind of way I go. I don't do much smaller than 3 for that instance. But yeah, so something like that, something that's got, good natural presentation to it. I don't do the crazy colors. I usually, I've got browns and olives, whites and blacks, stuff that looks real. Yeah, I'll make it as bushy and rubber leggy as I can in some instances, but it's going to look fairly natural, right? And so that's kind of the fly situation for sure.
Picture this: you're casting your line into the pristine waters of the Togiak River, surrounded by untouched Alaskan wilderness. At Togiak River Lodge, the dream becomes a reality. Here, every cast brings a chance of a lifetime, battling salmon or reeling in that majestic rainbow trout. But it's not just the fish, it's the adventure. With Togiak's expert guides and exclusive access to over 30 miles of river, your fishing story is waiting to be written. And guess what? I'll be joining this summer too. Don't let this be the one that got away. Visit togiaklodge.com right now. That's Togiak, Togiak Lodge right now, and embark on your unforgettable journey. Remember, it's not just fishing, it's Togiak. So you're up north now, but you started kind of down south. Maybe talk about your home water now and how you're catching these Michigan brown trout.
Yeah, so with that, it's kind of 2 different ways you can go at it from a fly perspective. One way obviously is with an indicator. You're dropping down with a couple of egg patterns, because that's the main food source in the system. We've got salmon come in, they drop eggs. We've got another kind of salmon, it comes in, drops eggs, and then the browns come in after them, is essentially what we've got going on. So there's a lot of eggs in the system. So, I'll just use double drop. I'll have an egg that I want to be about a foot off the bottom. I've got an egg I want to be right on the bottom. I'll use an indicator rig, and that's, fishing the seams, doing that stuff the way you think you should if you fish very much at all. That's one way to catch them. For me, that is incredibly boring. I hate watching the bobber all day.
Right.
But if the bait fish aren't in the river, and, we had a bad year for bait fish or something, we actually kind of had a pretty slow year this year. If they're not in there, they're just really not keen on those bait fish as much as they are in years where they are there. And so, this year we did resort to throw an indicator quite a bit, just because there weren't quite as many around, where the year before there were gobies everywhere and we were catching most of our fish throwing big streamers. But for me, that's exciting, right? You bomb a 6-inch streamer out on an edge, swing it out, and you see a 35-inch, 20-pound brown come up and swallow it. There's nothing more, for me, there's not very many things much more exciting than that, especially for trout.
Right. So yeah, 35-inch fish, really anything over, anything, it's all big. But so what is that? So if you got the big fly, is this a typical streamer game? Maybe describe a little bit about how you're fishing those streamers and the rivers. And what's your home? Like, where is your hometown that you're coming out of?
So I'm in the Madison area in Wisconsin. So the tributaries all around Lake Michigan, all around all these like Superior tribs, like the Brule, all that stuff. And even on, the other Great Lakes too, they get these same sorts of runs. And it's basically these, browns are out in the lake and they're going to come into particular rivers. Now, they don't come into all of them. They come into a lot of them. It's a temperature thing. It's something pretty easy to look up. You'll see places, if you start looking into, these lake run fish, you'll find approximately what rivers are great. Like there's some that are, super famous, like Pierre Marquette, right? That's the first place that we introduced brown trout in the United States. That place gets them, right? It's famous for it. The Brule is another one. The Brule that's coming off of Superior. It's another one of those places where you're going to get these run fish that are huge. Here on our side, Milwaukee's famous for it and stuff like that. But, those streams in that area, if you're close to one of those major, well-known big brown spots, you'd be surprised that the smaller rivers have them in them too. So looking through that's a good way to kind of find where you want to fish. When I fish for them, and a little bit of this is about touch while you're fishing, I use an intermediate fly line. I'm using sinking leader. So I use like a 5 inch per second sinking leader. I do a tippet ring to the end of that so that I can use tippet over and over again without having to cut my leader way back and run through leaders really fast. But yeah, so I run a tippet ring and then I'm running like 2 or 3X, usually like 3X tippet. And with that, I can get it down as low as I want to. Now, if you cast that upstream and think that it's going to make it all the way throughout the drift, it's not going to. It's going to get hung up on something. So you got to really work on the speed of the flow, the angle that you're casting at, and finding where you need to be to make the cast and that fly be in the right spot when it gets there. That's really important. That takes a lot of practice. That stuff that's just a lot of touch, a lot of feel. And if you didn't want to have that much, to worry about, doing it with a floating line would make it a lot easier, right? Because you're just worrying about that very end. And that's something that as you watch the fly go through, you can kind of catch up to that pretty quickly. With the intermediate line and the sinking leader, stuff can really get down fast. And so you really pay attention to what's going on to make that happen. But yeah, that's kind of how I have that set up for the streamer thing.
Okay. And then is this just kind of a downstream and across sort of swinging flies down mostly?
Yeah, I'll do that. The swing works pretty well. I also, really like to move my fly around too. So it's hard for me not to jig a lot, so I'll get it down there and I'll, basically will do strip jerk stuff. Strip jerk, in my opinion, is the way to go. So you strip in a little bit of line, whack that rod, strip a little bit of line, whack that rod, make sure you have slack in between. So it really moves that fly around. In my opinion, I have moved some fish that would have only moved because of that strip jerk. So that's one thing too. Really move it around in front of them if they're not taking it on the swing, and it may just change everything. Great.
Okay. It sounds like, it's more, and is this part of this, finding the fish? Is that a big part, or is it more timing of, timing a year? Or how would you recommend if somebody's listening now, they're in the area and they're like, okay, where do I go to get started on some of these big browns? What would they do?
Yeah. So it can be really complicated. Water temperature is kind of in there, but kind of not, water levels are kind of in there, kind of not. One of the things is if it's about the right time of year. So if you're in, like early December, for example, that would be about the right time of year for where I'm at. If it's about the right time and there's been some water in the system, like if we've had some good rain and some water's really pushed through it, it's giving them an opportunity to get up there. They seem to key on that when that water comes through, that big rush of water they like to run. So when they're up there and they're established before they spawn, they can be awesome. They can be really good. Sometimes they're so focused on finding a place to make a bed that it's not as good. But after they spawn, so during the spawn, they don't all spawn at the same time. So pretty much throughout, you can catch fish. But when you have the big group on beds, we leave those fish alone, right? You can go and look at them. It's awesome. They're giant, right? And it's cool just to see them fighting each other. 2 35s fighting each other over a hen is really fun to watch. But after they spawn, they are ravenous. And that's my favorite time. Those hens haven't eaten in a long time. Those males have been fighting for a long time.
Right.
They've wasted a bunch of energy. And then whenever they come off, man, look out.
What time of this is kind of like later fall, or when is this?
Yeah, so December is kind of like the beginning in like my area of Wisconsin. The further north you go, the earlier it can be. And then if you go too far, it gets too cold. Usually you don't see as many up there. It's more of a salmon thing. The other cool thing is like around that same time you get winter run steelhead too. So you've got big rainbows in there as well, which can be a great time as well. And they'll do the same thing. Everybody talks about floating eggs for steelhead. I throw big streamers at them. That's what I think is fun. I think people enjoy it. It's not the most proficient way necessarily. Like I think, throwing the eggs is a pretty solid way to go about it, but just, the take and the fight and all that, watching them come up and swallow it, that's what you like to see.
Amazing. This is great. Okay. Well, I think I want to start take it out of here. We're going to do our fly shop shout out segment, and then I'm going to ask you a few random questions. But today's fly shop shout out is presented by Waters West Fly Fishing Outfitters, and they're actually on the other side of the country. We're talking Michigan. Waters West is out on the OP, so they I know Ed and Kyle know all about swinging flies for steelhead in that region and the stuff they do. So that's our first shout out for you as we start to take it out of here. Who would be your local fly shop? You mentioned Madison. Who is there one that you would give a shout out to today?
Yeah, sure. I've got two. So one, Muskie Full. Those guys have been doing a great job. They're my local shop for sure. Another one, just because of the driftless, right? Driftless Angler. Can't say enough about those guys. They're awesome. Driftless Angler fly shop. They're in Viroqua. They're cool people. I'm actually going to an event right after this with them.
Oh, really? Oh, what's the event?
They're having like a casting carnival, and they're showing the IFF Film Festival stuff at a drive-in theater. It's going to be a pretty cool
that's
time.
Right. I heard about that.
Yeah, there's going to be some casting instructors there, and I'm just going to go and play.
Amazing.
But yeah, so we're going to have a good time, and I love those guys. Can't say enough about them. If you're in the Wisconsin Driftless, that's a place to stop by for sure. And, if you're into the muskie thing, again, Muskie Full, they really have kind of cornered the market on that, right? They really know what they're talking about. They do a good job over there. Can't say enough about them.
Love it. No, this is great. And I think the cool thing is these episodes, and actually the Driftless, we're doing a trip with them too, with Jerry and Matt have been setting that up. So we're going to be there with them. And that's kind of the cool thing. I think all this stuff, right? You find those great shops, whether it's through the podcast or whatever, and then people are resonating with that. So even since those trips are sold out now, I think, this will be out next year. We'll hopefully be doing these again. People can check it out. So that's great. And so let's take it out of here with a few. I want to go back to the casting, and then we'll go back to a few random things. So let's talk just for a second, advanced casting, right? I remember back in the day trying to cast a country mile for steelhead on the Deschutes and struggling, especially when the wind was blowing. Mm-hmm. What is, when you're talking longer, maybe for, what are your tips? Are we doing the same tips you mentioned today or anything else you'd shed light on?
Yeah. So like the basic stuff is still the basic stuff, right? Loop control, get that line speed fast. When you start getting to the advanced stuff, you start kind of changing things a little bit. So one thing that will help a lot is trying to get that haul to happen later and later. I said, you're hauling throughout the cast, and that's how you want to begin. That's how you want to start. That's all good. Make sure you are hauling, make that haul really big. But when you get to really far distances, you almost want to hold off as you're coming through and haul really hard closer to the end. Right. And so there's a thing called basically drag and drift is what it's called. So you've made your back cast. What drift is you've made that cast, you've stopped, and you kind of take the rod back in the direction the line's going. That keeps that slack out, right? And so then you come forward and you drag that thing along with you. Before you start casting, you're just kind of taking that slack out, and then you're going to start your cast, and then you're going to haul toward the end. And getting that slack out with drag and drift and, getting that haul closer and closer to the stop, that's going to be kind of in that more advanced category of stuff. It is going to pick up that line speed. It'll surprise you. If you get really good at it and you start really getting that timing down and really working on hauling at specific times, that's kind of that next level stuff. That's the stuff I work on. And so that would be the next level, I think.
Okay. And I go back to sometimes past episodes. Actually, I do that a lot, thinking about what guests of other guests. And I think, I remember Joan Wolf way back when she was talking about the haul at the, the very end. And that's when I think she was talking about the same thing. Maybe that was more of advanced, but so what you're saying is that would be advanced versus, say, you're hauling throughout the entire casting stroke on the back and the forward, right? Because you can
Absolutely.
do that. Yeah, okay. And that would be more, that's good to do too. That's going to speed up the line, but it's not going to speed it up as fast as if you get this really hyper-focused on a small haul window. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sure. And if you think about how I was talking about proper application of force, I said, you want to accelerate all the way to the end and make your hard stop, right? So as you can imagine, if you start that acceleration, you start that haul, and it's closer to where that stop is, you're actually getting it faster. You're bending the rod harder. You're getting it bent, and it's staying straight. When you come to that stop, it's launching it out. It's just, it is better.
Yeah, it is. Okay, good. So that's some advanced. And then anything, as far as today we've talked, like we said, some high-level stuff. What is the next step? Somebody's listening right now, and they're like, okay, this is resonating with me on the casting. What's the first thing I can do right now today to start leveling up my cast?
Loop control. Loop control, loop control, loop control. I'm going to come back to it all the time. And if you think you have better loop control than you really do, that's one thing. But, seeing it in the air, watching yourself, that's one way to really see what you've got going on. But make sure that line lands straight. Get a tape out there, get a rope out there. And when you cast, if you cast, your line's landing straight on the rope every time and it's straightening out fully, that's one of those things. You're being straight, you've got loop control, everything's going in the right direction. That's a really good way to start out. I can't, really cannot stress how important straightness is. Being straight is going to help everything, right? Taking away that tracking error, taking away everything else, working on where you want your arm to be to make sure it's going straight away from the target, straight back to it. Can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. Okay. And then one other, just on the arc, the casting arc. So typically, you start short, you can do a short little arc as you get longer and longer. How do you know how far of a make, to make that arc? Like, how do you know how big to make it as you're learning to make bigger casts or smaller?
Yeah. So one great way is the feedback that the loop gives you. We learn a lot about what our cast is because of the loop. You're looking at the loop and that's a really good way to know. So if you've got too narrow of a casting arc and you're throwing too much line with too much force, you're going to throw a tail. So that's what's going to happen, right? So, widen that casting arc out and you're going to be less likely. It's going to be more of a tendency to tail, not quite tailing. And then you make that arc bigger, you're going to have, a more straight top leg. Now, on the other end of things, if your casting arc is too wide, right, and you're putting a certain amount of force into it, which is not enough for that casting arc, and you don't have enough line out there, it's going to be a big wide loop. It's going to have a curved top leg. It's going to be a big round thing coming through there. And so when you start to learn that with your setup, your rod, your line, your cast, when you look at those forward loops, you can base it off of that. So when I pick up a new rod, my first cast may not be great. My second one's going to be awesome, right? Because I'm going to see what the loop did with what I think I should have, approximately where I think things should start and stop. I'm going to see that loop and I'm going to be like, okay, well, that was maybe a little bit too narrow. I need to cast wider with this one. Or, okay, well, maybe that was too wide. I need to cast narrower, right? And so generally speaking, long line, long pause, wider casting arc, more force. But if you got a short line, it's, shorter pause, shorter casting arc, less force. All that stuff is really important to kind of work out. And that's kind of based, in those essentials, right? Learning those essentials and knowing how to do things is the right way to go. And then let the loop tell you. I mean, the loop's going to tell you whenever I'm analyzing the cast, that's the first thing I'm looking at. What's this loop doing? And now it's like, okay, well, what's the rod doing? Okay, what's the body doing? And working back up. That's Bruce Richards' 6-step method. Pretty famous for that. It's a really good way to analyze it from a casting instructor's perspective, but also as a caster, right? If you're out there and you're looking at the loop's going to tell you what you're doing.
Yeah. And have you mentioned those 6 steps, Bruce's method?
Yeah, so it's kind of like that. So in Bruce's 6-step method, whenever he's looking at a cast to analyze it, it starts the loop. Okay, what's the loop doing? It's a wide loop. All right, let's get down to the rod. What's the rod doing? Well, it's got way too wide of a casting arc. Okay, now let's go to the body. What's the body doing? Well, they're bending the wrist way too much, and it's making this big casting arc, making that big loop, right? So you analyze it that way, and then to fix it, you do the opposite. You start with the body. All right, let's not make as big a movement with our wrist, a little bit smaller movement, right? And then, that translates to the rod. Well, now the rod's in a better casting arc for that amount of line and that amount of force. Now, if you look at the loop, right, it's narrower, right? So it's basically, you take it from the top down and you fix it from the down, from the bottom up. And that's how the method really, now that's me paraphrasing. That was not a perfect example. And I hope Bruce doesn't even hear this. But yeah, so that's essentially how it works, right?
Yeah.
And so that method for casting instructors is a really good way as a caster to kind of think about what you're doing and what you got going on. And the easiest way to do that is to film yourself.
That's awesome tip. So I think the filming is a great tip we've talked about. And so on Bruce, maybe take it there is if somebody wanted to connect with Bruce, is he kind of out there doing this stuff mostly through FFI? Is that the best way to, and maybe Bruce or other mentors? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the mentor program with the guys that are really good, one of the easier ways would be going through FFI. Bruce is not hard to find. You can get his email. He responds to them really well. One of those guys, right, that you wonder why he responds to your email so fast. You wonder why he calls you back so fast because this dude's like a legend of the game, right? And he has been great. I can't say enough about Bruce. He's one of the best that's ever lived. And if you ask those greats, a lot of them will say the same thing, right?
What was his in fly fishing? I'm not sure. Where did he work? What was his deal?
Yeah, so Bruce had a lot to do with the fly lines coming out of SA. So he worked for SA for a long time, scientific angler, and then he was also really involved in FFI when it started. So he was right there, ground level with FFI, and he's been with them, since, right? And so, yeah, he's just a legend. Like his instruction's great. He's a cool guy. Can't say enough about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So finding his information is not hard. Shoot him an email, you'd be surprised. I mean, he loves this stuff. He's a nerd about it like I am. He'll be more than willing to talk to you, do all that.
Good. Well, we'll work on getting Bruce on, and we'll maybe keep this conversation going a little further. I always love to check in on, some travel plans. It sounds like you've been around. Maybe we got the travel plans, and I know you've got some record chasing that you've done. Maybe we'll start with the records first. What does that mean? Maybe talk about that a little bit. Where were you chasing records?
Yeah. So this is gonna make me sound like a bad person, maybe. Yeah. So South Florida peacock bass started getting into it, and the 5X record for fly was, I think at the time it was like 9 pounds 11 ounces, and like I'd looked into it a little bit because we all want to know what the biggest one is, right?
Yeah.
And so watching that through IGFA, and then starting to find some bigger ones, and I was like, okay, well maybe I should like do this. So I kind of nerded out on it for like 3 years, and I got one 9 pound 6 ouncer and 9.5, and I've got a story. I won't call out IGFA too much for it, but they wanted me to kill them for those weight records, or
oh wow,
for those tippet records. That's kind of how they've always been with those records, and it's going all the way back, right? Those tarpon records, all that stuff from the past. It was a lot about killing them.
Is that the case today?
There are still records that are on that. What IGFA has done, which I'm so happy they have done, is now there's a category for catch and release, and it's a length record now. And that's kind of what I do with the Browns here. I've got a pretty funny story. And again, IGFA is a great organization, and I don't mean to say anything bad about them. But they opened up youth records recently, I think within the last 2 years. And when it happened, I called my nephew and I said, hey man, I'm going to be in Arkansas. There's a cool place we can go fish for big fish. Let's go break a world record. Right. And so he and I go down. There's this place called Dry Run Creek. It goes into the North Fork in Arkansas. It's real close to the White River. And we went there and found a 28-inch rainbow. And this, my 11-year-old nephew catches this 28-inch rainbow. And we get it all, taped out. It's going to be the world record for sure. We know it, right? And they're really specific about how they want their pictures and stuff. And like, I've got the video of it. Like, we're pumped, we're freaking out. And, our pictures didn't cut the mustard. They weren't exactly what they wanted. And so we didn't get it.
Oh, wow.
Which was devastating, right, for him.
Yeah.
But I just tell him, like, hey, this stuff's really specific. It's a really specific thing. Like, you get the stuff notarized. You got to go to a biologist and make sure it's the right fish. You've got to do, there's a lot to it. The fly has to be right. The leader has to be right. All that stuff. And I told him, I was like, hey, we know we caught a great one. We didn't quite hit the specifications the way we wanted to, but we'll get the next one, right? We'll do it right the next time. And I'm doing the same thing with the Browns. That length record, I'm chomping at the bit to take. I've had 3 that were over that would have done it, but I want it to be like a real big one. And so I've caught one 40-incher that I didn't send in. Just wanted it to be a bigger fish, man. It's long enough, but I want it to be a big.
You caught a 40-inch. What was the 40-incher?
40-inch brown trout.
Oh wow! So yeah, you've landed some 40-inch brown trout.
Yeah, one.
You won. Yeah. That's enough.
I've lost one that would have definitely been big enough. Usually, I think my biggest weight-wise, probably like 30 pounds. I've caught some pretty big, like hefty girls. But yeah, I think I've got a couple of 38s in there, a couple of 37s in there, and then that 140.
Wow.
Big number, man. 40 is a big number.
Yeah, 40. And what is that 40-inch? How many pounds would that 40-incher be?
Well, that's the thing. That's one of the reasons why I didn't feel so bad that I didn't put that one in. It was a real snaky old fish.
Yeah.
And it was post spawn, and it was just real long, at the end of the day. But a good sized 40, it's got a good body on it. We're talking 40 pounds for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because that's with steelhead. Typically, it's you use your 30 inches. Typically, I guess. Well, you kind of have that standard, right? I don't know. I guess.
Yeah.
Brown trouts are different, right? Because they're a little bit thicker. Maybe they have more girth, typically.
Yeah. But I mean, we catch steelhead here the same way. I mean, big heavy ones. 35s are a yearly thing. Yeah. but not quite as big as those Northwest ones, right? You know, I need to get out there and spend the time to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like we said, the OP. I mean, there's been ups and downs as steelhead runs out on the West Coast, but there still are opportunities. In fact, I just talked to Ed, like we mentioned, up there on the OP, and they were getting some fish early. It was looking like a good year. So yeah, hopefully things continue getting better out there. But well, this has been cool. And I think if somebody wants to get into potentially a 40-inch fish or 30-inch or just some giant brown, they can do that, right? By connecting with you. And
oh, sure.
Are you guiding now? Now, is that something that you're doing quite a bit throughout the year?
Yeah. So, as a caveat to that, I want you to be able to fish. So, I am kind of choosy on people that go with me. Sure, reach out. That's great. It's just not for the weary, right? It's a cold season. December in Wisconsin can be really cold. I fish all the way through to March, right? I fish January, February too. As long as the river's not frozen, I'm going because they're in there, Yeah. But yeah, so it's not for the faint of heart for sure. And you need to be able to cast pretty well. You need to be able to know how to fight fish. I don't want to go out there and break off a bunch of fish for no good reason or snag a bunch of fish or do something silly. I do take on people, I've had beginners and stuff. I just try to corner my market to the guys that are out there and know what we're getting into, right? We might get blanked, but if we catch one, it's going to be the biggest one you've ever seen. I mean, it'll blow your mind,
There you go. Well, that's a good incentive. So we'll let anybody, if they want to, take the challenge or if you have some chance, they can check in with you.
Yeah, sure.
So a couple of, random ones. These are typical ones we might check in on. So maybe on just traveling, you mentioned peacock bass. I guess that's a species I don't think as much, in Florida as some other parts of the world. But what you got any travel plans, or is that something that's always, as you look ahead, that you're thinking like, hey, I want to go get this fish with maybe a giant pattern?
Yeah, so peacock are weird. It's actually like pretty small flies for the butterflies that are in South Florida. And they're basically from Fort Lauderdale south. Probably one of the best places there is around the Miami airport. Interesting enough. Yeah, peacock's always on my mind. I haven't done it in a couple of years. I always want to go back to it because I've got fond memories with that fish, chasing that fish, catching them, a 5-pounder behind a Dunkin' Donuts in a big city in Florida is nice. Cool, right? Yeah. My current one, I think we're going Belize for permit this next year. I'm always going out to Montana. I'm seeing Bruce doing the fly festival there in Ennis and doing that stuff. Grayling's my fish, I think, for Montana this year. I think I'm going to really, really focus on grayling. There's still some natural ones and I'm going to go try to get a real one. Yeah. Otherwise, man, I'm all around. I got, I go down south quite a bit, go to Arkansas quite a bit, fish that stuff. I get as much of it as I can. I think my number one on the list right now, I've tried it twice. I've had 3 chasers. Is a rooster on the beach, man.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh. Rooster on the beach is what I want. And there you go, right? You want to get into distance casting. You want to get better. If you're going to target that fish, you got to work on it.
Roosters,
Yeah. Big wind off the beach. It's hard to get through. I've done it in Central America a couple of times. And, that's one of those fish for me, for sure. Just general fun, though, I'll tell you. And it's something you can do in Florida. And it may be one of the coolest things is the snook run on the beach. They run, pretty close to the sand and you just walking down the beach looking for them. It's kind of a similar deal to that rooster thing. That's probably my favorite thing in the world to do, chasing stuff. If I had one fish I was going to go after, I'd chase snook on the beach.
Snook. Yeah. Snook on the beaches. I love that. Yeah. That's so cool to hear because we hear a lot about snook too. We hear the, bonefish, tarpon, permit sort of thing. And then it's always like, okay, and snook. It's the 4th one. You never.
Yeah.
Right. But it sounds like to you, maybe the snook is that top fish.
Yeah, I think for me the snook's the fish. It's just because they're just they're unruly. They eat pretty big flies. Not huge, like 6-inch. Basically try to match a pilchard, right? Scaled sardine, and you're just going up and down looking for them. You can make that good cast. You can see that big shadow on the bottom in the clear waters of South Florida, and you put it at a 45. You pull it out in front of them, and it's like a saltwater 40-pound largemouth bass, man. They come out of nowhere. You can fish them on the docks. You can fish them at night on the lights. Like they're unruly. And that's why I like them so much. They're fun. It's one of my favorites for sure.
Cool. So that's it. Got a snook shout out. So in a couple random ones here, and then we'll let you get out of here. I saw something about cheese curds. The cheese in moderation sort of thing. But
yeah, for sure.
What is we're heading out to that area, so we're going to be hitting. I think we are staying at the Treelands Resort sort of thing with the Muskie Fool with Dan and the crew. But like if they're coming into Madison, do you give us a place to eat? Where can we get some cheese curds or just some good food?
Okay, yeah. So the stuff on the square in Madison, so like that Capitol Square. There's some good stuff there. The old fashions there. We're famous for our old fashions as well. They have really good cheese curd there at the old fashioned restaurant. My favorite, and like I'm kind of a connoisseur about this.
Nice.
I'm pretty big into the cheese. Looking for the best that I can find. One of my favorite curds is at Long Table. It's in Middleton, at Madison suburb area. There's a place called Long Table. They've got a good curd there as well.
Okay, a curd. And I won't go too deep into the cheese curds, but I will ask you kind of cheese in moderation. Is that a smart thing to be thinking about? You don't want to go overdo it on your cheese consumption?
Oh, yeah. Especially if you're going to be fishing, after, right? Like for a few days there. Yeah, cheese in moderation. You got to try those fried cheese curds, though.
Okay.
It's worth your time to experience it, right? If you haven't had them from here, of course I'm biased, right? I live here, but yeah, you got to try them out, man. They're pretty good.
Good. All right. Well, we'll check out for sure when we're there. We'll be doing that along on our road trip. And what about rods? I know, I'm not sure. Do you have a favorite rod, a favorite brand, a favorite, kind of anything there you want to give a heads up on? Shout out.
Yeah, sure. I'm kind of nerdy when it comes to that stuff. And I'm going to say one obvious, shout out to Loomis, right? They've always been good to me. Right now I'm casting an NRX Plus for most of my casting stuff. But I can't say enough about Douglas Outdoors. A lot of people don't know them. It's crazy. Especially out west, right?
That's the interesting thing about Douglas because, and I am out west, and that's one of those things where I remember I've heard about them a lot because I've kind of been in the flight, here doing the podcast. But I remember before I had not heard of them at all. And I'm like, oh, Douglas is just one of those, another random thing. But no, they've been around for a long time and actually I think are winning awards and stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So like the last couple of shootouts, they've been number one. The Sky G, I've got a Sky G. And that's what I passed my CI with. That's what I used for the CI. I love it. It's a great rod. If you match the line great to it too, there's, man, it's like a rocket. I love that rod. Can't say enough about both of them, right? They've been good to me. Both have done stuff for me. They've been really good companies with customer service, all that stuff, especially for guys like me, right? And I can't say enough about both of those. I won't pick one, live, right? But yeah, both of those companies, Douglas, I can't say enough about them. They've been really good. They get that, mom and pop feel a little bit too with their customer service who you're talking to, and they make a great product. I can't say enough about them.
Sweet. No, that's perfect. And just one final one on, the music or podcast. I always love to scratch my own itch. Do you listen on a road trip or you listen to more podcasts or music or what's that look like?
Yeah, I travel a lot, right? Especially doing the run stuff. I'm coming from Madison, so I got a couple hour drive. It's about an hour and a half to the Driftless. So I'm in the car a lot, and I hate to say it, but I am a ebook guy, man. I listen to books. I listen to tons of books, and get to that point where, I go and stay in the Driftless for a few days so I can catch a few different clients, and I'm listening to a book the whole time. Audiobooks is my thing.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I love audiobooks too. I've been listening. I think they're very similar podcasts, right? It's all audio.
Oh, for sure.
You can download it, listen to it. What's your audiobook? You want to give us a shout out to an audio? Do you listen is this like business, fly fishing? What type of books are you listening to?
Yeah, John Gurok's got some stuff. I love that stuff. Trout Bomb, all that stuff. Those are good listens. Kind of ran through Stephen King, kind of that style of thing.
Sure.
Podcast wise, just because the South Florida thing, I was there for a long time.
Yeah.
I like Millhouse, right?
Yeah, Millhouse, great.
Love those guys and those stories because I've spent time kicking around in those same areas and doing those same things. And, I dabble in the record stuff too. And so
that's right.
Yeah, that podcast, love it.
Yeah, they do a great job. We had I can't remember what episode it was, but we'll have a link out to that one as well that we did with them. And it's a cool story because the host, right? He's got a cool history with all sorts of professional. Do you know much about Andy Mill and his story?
Oh man, yeah. He's a great tournament fisher, all that stuff. Yeah, and knows everybody, right? All the guys that were greats. The people that we watched when we were kids. I can't say enough about Flip Palette, all that stuff too, right? And so I love that show.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool, Kaylyn. Well, we like we mentioned at the start, we'll send everybody out on Instagram, The Fly Road. They can track you down or shoot you an email. We'll have a link there. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for coming on today. This has been awesome, and definitely the tips. It's always hard, on the podcast, right, with audio. But I think that for me, it's more shedding light on your stuff, and they can track you down and follow what you have going. So yeah, thanks again for all your time today, and we'll look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate it. And one other thing too, I just wanted to throw out there, my colleague in Iowa, Marty McVeigh, he is great at what he does too. So if you're in the Iowa area or you're closer to him where you can get some in-person casting stuff, I mean, I can't say enough about Marty. I wouldn't be where I am today. He's introduced me to some huge names. Can't say enough about Marty. Great guy.
Great. No, I'm glad you did that. Mentioned that because Marty, we'd been talking. He was on the webinar you guys did together. And I'm actually going to get Marty on as a follow-up. So we'll be getting more into the casting with Marty. And It's Iowa, too. Iowa is always great. We struggle, I think, to find a lot of Iowa topics, you know what I mean? Because it's kind of in that middle of the country. So we'll definitely get Marty on, and that will be great. So, yeah, thanks again, Kaylyn, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Had a good time. Thank you.
Nice. Casting is always a challenge. It's a challenge for me. I think it's always something we can improve on. So I hope you grabbed a couple of nuggets out of that today, and maybe the call to action would be to grab one of those exercises, one of those drills, and maybe try that. Maybe it's the one with the cones. Maybe it's that straight line drill. See if you can get that line straight out in your yard. You can do it today, possibly. Check it out. All right, please follow the show if you get a chance. If you're on Apple Podcasts, just click that plus button, and you'll get updated when that next episode goes live. We've got episodes going live multiple times a week, as always, so that would be much appreciated. Heads up to the shop. If you haven't heard about this shop, this is Wet Fly Swing Pro. This Pro membership is a paid membership, and it's going to be a place where it's like that safe place to come in and chat and build trips. So we're going to be working together with everybody who's in there to build the greatest trip for you this season. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you could send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, and just put the shop in the subject line, and I'll know that I can follow up with you there. We're launching this very soon, and we are going to take a beta group, a small group of people who want to start off fresh and build this thing out. It's going to be fun. So the shop, Wet Fly Swing Pro, we've got a new logo. It looks awesome. Can't wait to share that with everybody. All right, I think I'll leave it there for now. I appreciate you for stopping in today. We've got all sorts of great content coming up. I can't wait to hopefully get Bruce Richards on the phone soon. And I'm excited to talk to you. Hope you have a great morning, a great afternoon, or a great evening, wherever in the world you are or in the country. And I will look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.